Welcome everybody to this Enrichment seminar, part of the journalism program in the English department. I really appreciate that you're here this afternoon. My name is Tom Moore. I teach here in the journalism program along with the director of the journalism program, Glenn Lewis, and in the back row over there with a tie on today, a sign of great respect, is Bill Hughes, my colleague, also a professor in the journalism program. And due in any minute, here's Claire Serrant, Professor Claire Serrant over in the corner, who arranged this whole thing. I am merely the moderator, or as I was called yesterday, the MC, the master of ceremonies, whatever. So we'll get this started for real by first recognizing the work that Professor Serrant did, and I'd like to see if you'd like to say a few words about the panel. Otherwise, right after you, we'll start things off with a few comments from the director of the journalism program, Glenn Lewis. Claire?
Just thank you for coming, and I think there are many opportunities in business and legal reporting, and I hope that you will be able to talk with our panelists about internship opportunities.
Very quickly, thank you all for coming, both journalism students from York and especially students who came from elsewhere, from Queensborough Community College. We're very glad to have you guys here. This is part of an ongoing series of seminars we've been doing for the last 5 years. We usually do 2 enrichment seminars a semester and 4 a year. It's sort of hit and miss. I'm sorry, guys. Sometimes we have 100 people. Sometimes we have 20. Sometimes it's all over the place. But what the whole idea of the enrichment seminars are to add breadth and depth to some of the subject areas that we don't have enough time to cover in our courses adequately. So we also want to expose the students here at the program and other students who come to some of the other careers in journalism that might not be front and center in their minds, or they might not have a really working knowledge of, to give you an idea of all the opportunities that are out there. We decided to do it on law and business reporting today because those are 2 of the most prominent areas in journalism, probably with the greatest impact in media today and on some of the stories that are breaking today. And yet very few students starting out in journalism say to themselves in the beginning, I'm going to be a business journalist, or I'm going to be someone who reports on law. It's just really unusual. Marinissa Wani, who's sitting in the middle there very quietly, is a former York College student who went to our journalism program, was the editor of the newspaper, went from there to Columbia School of Journalism. When you started out, did you think of being a business reporter? Not
at all.
Did you think you were going to wind up at Forbes?
I didn't even take an econ class or a finance class here at all.
All right, so you don't know where you're going to wind up. That's the point I'm mentioning. So many of you seem so definite about what your future in journalism looks like. And I think all 3 of the panelists would probably tell you that your career takes turns that you just can't plan on. And the most important thing is to get educated, to get exposed to all the areas of journalism so you have as wide a choice as possible. All right? And thank you very much for coming today. We really appreciate you doing this.
Thank you, Glenn. Let me just do some formal introductions of our guests. Starting from my right, we have Aaron Elstein from Crain's, and he's been covering New York. He's been covering his beat since 1996, working on a wide range of topics on Wall Street. Would that be fair?
That sounds about right.
Yes, a wide range of topics, all aspects of what's going on Wall Street. Before Crain's, he wrote a Wall Street Journal column called Heard on the Street, which to young journalists getting your training now, that might not cause a Heard on the Street. On Wall Street, that is said with bended knee. When you hear, you kneel down and you read every word because it's very famous, and it's parked on the front page, or
now it's on the back page.
It's on the back page where but it's a very famous part of the Wall Street Journal. So keep that in the back of your mind. Heard on the Street columns of the Wall Street Journal, one of his previous positions. But and then a spot that I heard about when I was a young puppy journalist to get a place to get a start was the American Banker. American Banker is another place where Aaron worked, a very good place to get your first reporting job, where they know, and I verified this with Pete, where they know that when you get your BA in journalism, you're not going to walk out with legal knowledge and walk out with a lot of investing knowledge. If you show up at American Banker, they're going to show you some of the ropes, and you're going to be writing the first basic stories, and before you know it, you're doing more and more advanced work as a business reporter. And last but not least, guess how he got his start? Downstate Illinois, corruption, graft, all kinds of nasty doings going on in Springfield, Illinois for the Illinois Times. Go to a smaller market and fight your way back. You've probably heard that a couple times. And I got to keep going because your bio had one great nugget in it about how, yes, you're an award winner. We're very lucky to have you with your awards from the Society, from the American Business Editors and Writers, SABEW. When I worked at Bloomberg, that was also a big deal. So we're very happy to have you here, as well as awards from SPJ and others. And this is the part I liked. You live in Washington Heights, and you spend a high percentage of your free time worrying about the Red Sox.
Well, not much lately, no.
Yeah, and I just have to be snarky and say, well, at least you're not too worried about the Yankees, obviously. And I'm not going to say the next thing that my students know. I'm going to say I happen to be an Orioles fan, but that's okay. Okay, so so we're very pleased to have you with us, Aaron. Thank you very much.
Nice to meet you.
Moving right along. We have Marinissa Wani, as you can see from the super cool, classy name tag I made, York graduate. York graduate from 2010? 2010? 2011. First class of BAs?
No, I think I was second.
Second class we ever had anybody get a BA in journalism here. Okay, and Marinissa graduated and went to the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism, and after that, went on to Forbes, and she's going to give you some details on that. But I did a little digging, and it's not exactly investigative journalism, but I did see that, and this is an interesting lesson, that she reports on things as sophisticated and maybe off the beaten track as Kashmir and what's going on up in northern India. One side you've got Pakistan, one side you've got China, and India sitting underneath. From the Kashmir region to Donna Karan, the designer, right on the website with her name on it. So expect to do a lot of different things. But the cool thing I also noticed was under her name, underneath Marinissa's name, it says covering game changers and do-gooders. You gotta love that. So Marinissa, we're very happy to have you with us.
Thank you.
And then last but not least, Pete Brush from Law 360. Pete and I negotiated this introduction a minute ago. Thank you very much for helping jumpstart the talk before the appetizer, before the talk started. Senior reporter covering New York courts, and guess who was editor running the CBS News website on 9/11?
Wow.
That must have been a fun day. And the next day, and the next day, and the next 3 weeks. I mean, I can't even imagine. And also, at 360, you covered Madoff, or before that?
I've been at Law 360 for 6 years now. So yeah, I got to
Bernie Madoff,
to cover Bernie. That was
the incredibly
fun.
corrupt investor, financial advisor. What would you call him?
I call him the Ponzi King.
A Ponzi scheme. And the Mets fans, grind your teeth, because the guy had his tentacles into so many things. Covered the guilty plea that he made, as well as sentencing. So we're very happy to have our guests here today. To launch things, how about if I let you just give us a short, well, this is probably why I'm here. The one thing I want to tell you is, what do you want to give as an introductory comment? And why don't we start out with Aaron? Just one quick introductory comment, please.
So I didn't ever imagine being a business journalist. I was a history major in college, and this was purely an accident. I was working for a paper in downstate Illinois, desperately wishing to get out of there, and moved to New York in the summer of 1996. And it happened to be a bull market back then. And business newspapers needed bodies. People were leaving and coming all the time back then. And so this paper called American Banker, who had an ad in the Sunday Times classified ads, remember those? When I sent them a resume, they answered the phone. So that's how it happened. This is business. This is a part of journalism with a really steep learning curve. It's kind of tough at the beginning because these MBAs are talking to you in all sorts of jargon. And a really key thing to learn to do is to tell them, shut up, what are you talking about? And once you sort of get that in your head, it starts to come along pretty quickly. And you can learn things and report things that most other journalists can't. And I would add that you're going to write for an audience that is used to paying for information. And that's a big problem in newspapers these days, is that the audience doesn't pay. Well, people on Wall Street are used to paying for everything. And if you can give them information that is useful to them, they'll pay for it. So that's why the business of business journalism is better than the business of daily papers. So these are operations that have people, need people, there's high turnover, there are opportunities. If you're willing to put up with the idea that you're not going to be covering, celebrities, and you certainly won't be as rich as the people you're writing about, it's a lot of fun. And sometimes you do write about celebrities, especially when they have business problems. But it's not like, working for ETV or something like that. So good luck.
Thank
Stick
you.
with it.
Yeah, I like that. I use a very worn out expression, which is, well, if you do it this way, the odds are a little higher beach house and the bigger BMW. So you're not going to make as much as the people you're covering. That's a good way to put it. Marinissa, just a quick introductory
Speaking of that, we cover billionaires at Forbes, and that is our major audience, and investors and entrepreneurs. So it feels pretty awful sometimes being in their presence. But nonetheless, I started out from York College, was a journalism and poli-sci major. I thought I was going to go into the world and do some international reporting, like Anderson Cooper style, take my camera and just I purchased a 5D and thought, hey, $5,000, it's an investment. Turns out one, it's a very difficult market to get into, and two, you need to be financially set or be willing to take that risk. And I wasn't. I went to grad school and I was like, holy schmoly, I know very little about journalism, and especially not enough to compete with all of the freelance journalists out there. So I had done a number of internships at ABC, the Daily News, and I decided that, I do not want to be in mainstream journalism where I'm writing sensational stories or, just digging up dirt. And I then applied for Forbes, and after several interviews, got the job. I think business journalism, I walked into my editor's office one day and I was like, hey, listen, I know nothing about stocks and bonds. I don't even know the difference. So you're going to have to really put up with me. And he was like, it's not a problem. Do not worry about that. Again, it's a steep learning curve and you just got to roll with it. And that is what I've been doing ever since.
Thanks, Marinissa. So, Pete, even though you gave us the introductory talk, how about an introductory minute or so of what you think the best advice, or whatever you want to tell us off the top of your head.
Well, Aaron, right?
Yeah.
I second Aaron's comments and your comments as well. It's definitely a good thing to be at a news organization that has income. I hate to say it that way, but it is the truth. And you will be from time to time writing about people who are in a different economic bracket. Most of the partners at the large law firms that we cover probably earn around 7 figures a year. They do well, and that's great for them, but they don't get to be journalists.
Tens of millions, not million. That would be sick. No, I'm sorry, that's million. That's million. Seven figures. Okay.
Yeah. So I've had a lot of lawyers tell me they sometimes wish they could change hats and do what I do. So, if you get up in the morning and you like what you do, that's valuable. So, how about that?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So all three of you touched on how you broke in, but you kind of scratched the surface. And I want to ask that question and go a little deeper and say, and we can start with Aaron. How about skills? How about personal skills as well as some of the more technical journalism skills? However you want to attack the question, if we want to go deeper into getting your start, how you got your start, and if you could read their minds and our students' minds, and they're trying to figure out also what kind of internship or plural internships, things like that.
I got started at American Banker, which is this trade publication that writes about the banking business of all things. And I couldn't balance a checkbook, and I certainly had no idea what banks were doing. I didn't really care either. But they said that these banks are buying each other out. They're merging like crazy. find out who's going to merge with who next. And what that turns out it meant was getting investment bankers drunk. That was largely the skill. Get these younger guys who just left like Wharton or Harvard Business School to get them in a bar and start talking about other people's deals and how stupid they were and what a dumb thing it was to merge this bank with another one. And then after a while, after they trusted you, they'd start telling you about their deals. And that's how it worked. And that was, once I sort of mastered that after a couple of years, I was ready to do something else, and that was how the journal thing came along. There are two kinds of reporters in business journalism, really. There are sort of access reporters, the people who are like on CNBC getting the big gets. Maria Bartiromo, who she interviews these big CEOs and these big people. That's one kind of business journalist. The other kind is a document-driven reporter. You are reading company filings, you're reading lawsuits, you're reading whatever paper is out there that is either publicly or perhaps if you're lucky, privately available to you, and basing a story off of that. There are basically two roads. And you have to decide which one you're comfortable at. I'm not comfortable being the center of attention in the room. Some journalists I know are. They can just light up the place. They're not shy in the least. I'm a very shy person. I do not like talking to strangers very much. It's tough, especially in this job. But I get around it because by reading up on what these people are doing, I have something to talk to them when I meet them. I'm dreadful at the interview of, so what's it like to be you? I'm bad at that. So, sort of know what you like to do and what your strengths are and weaknesses are, and find positions that will reflect that. It'll be pretty obvious to you after a little while what they are. If your job is at CNBC, lining up guests, be sure you're very comfortable dealing with publicists and saying, at 10:15 we have 20 seconds for you, so can you please do that? Because that's the job.
So Marinissa, how about that you're attack the question from most important skills or most important things you realize that you want to incorporate into your first couple of jobs. How do you get launched?
I think you need to be an omnivore. You just need to consume as much information as you possibly can. And have subscriptions to the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. Even if you don't understand the jargon, just make sure you have subscriptions. I know Professor Hughes, when I was taking his class, that's the number one thing he told us, was make sure you're reading. And I mean, I would have never picked up a Forbes if I didn't work there. But now I see myself, reading Forbes, Times, Bloomberg, and that's what you have to do. I also think that you need to have just a propensity to be nosy. You just need to want to know things. Additionally, in terms of like a skill set, you can learn Excel. There are so many things in business journalism that you can learn. You can learn how to go through SEC filings. You can, that's all stuff that you can learn on the job. I didn't come in with those skills, but I think you just need to be curious at the end of the day.
Good. And Pete, how about if we talk about the business from skills, either personal skills or maybe some technical skills, like you really have to be able to turn in clean copy and be a real eagle eye for being careful about your writing, however you want to attack it.
I mean, it does help to, we're very writing intensive at my job, and it does help to be able to write quickly and clearly, sometimes more quickly than other times, and also be very cognizant of the things you're writing, what a reader is going to think when they read it, whether or not it's going to make them angry, and maybe if it makes them angry in the right way, that's a good thing, but maybe if it makes them angry because you wrote something that is not right, that might make them angry in a way that's not good for you. So it is important to read your words and know what they mean when you write them. And then I would also say, piggybacking on just the skill set, since I'm more on the legal side, I guess, you don't need to be a lawyer to gain a basic knowledge of the law. You can know what's a trial, what's a lawsuit, what's a motion, all kinds of things like that. Those things are important, and they make news, and sometimes just having a basic grasp of that very sort of general legal terminology can help you if someone, I guess maybe is offering you an opportunity in that world. So certainly you don't have to be, you don't have to have a law degree, but it certainly helps to avail yourself to all of the tools that you can find online to read about what's what, and give yourself at least a step up, I would suppose.
Marinissa, I want to put, thank you. I want to put you in the spotlight here for a minute, and then your colleagues on the dais, our guests, can chime in. What's it like for women in the business today? You got your start with your ABC News internship, excellent credential, your master's in journalism from Columbia, and of course your BA from York, another outstanding credential. But you had to break in as a young woman. But you're a New Yorker, so you probably went in there with both fists ready to go. But still, I want to know, I think York is more women than men. The journalism program, many more women than men. Tell us what it was like, whether it was a tiny bit of chauvinism as a feminist. You were welcome. You keep that on the lower side of your Richter scale of like aggressiveness. What was it like personally, and what did you run into at ABC as well as Forbes? Maybe even at the journalism school at Columbia. Your role as a woman breaking into the business.
That's an interesting question, because in all of those little
I forgot
compartments.
to email you the question. Sorry.
No worries. In all of those little compartments of my life, I think that it was very different. It wasn't all reflective of York College. We have, at Columbia, it was a good mixture. At Forbes, it's a boys' club out there. I mean, sorry to disappoint ladies, but this is just what you have to deal with. But there's nothing wrong with that. I think at Forbes, they've been a very inclusive sort of community. It's a family. Everyone gets along. There's no gender bias there at all. But again, in today's just journalistic environment, you need to be at the forefront of all things at all times, and that doesn't matter if you're a male or a female. You just need to be on top of your game. So in terms of facing any hardship, I have not faced any hardship up to this point. But there may be challenges going up the ladder. You have kids and you have this, you get married, and so maybe I'll face those later on. But in terms of facing any of that in the beginning of my career, I haven't.
Pete and Aaron, if you want to take a stab at this, Marinissa, her first major nationally known boss was a woman. You work very closely with Diane Sawyer. Now, about to leave or already?
She's
gone.
Yeah,
that's right.
left.
And who's the young guy again? I don't even know him. You don't either. Good.
David Muir.
David Muir, yeah. Didn't meet him. David Muir, he was a correspondent.
Right. I know
while
he's
she was-
well established. But my point is, I have had really intelligent, strong women bosses throughout my career. McNeil Lehrer NewsHour, NBC News, New York Times, and I was a street reporter calling in quotes. It was a copy editor on the other line as a woman. So I just want to maybe that's a little bit of fuel for you to jump into this conversation and say, from your viewpoint, what is 360 like? Are there a lot of women working there?
Absolutely. I'd say I've been in journalism 20 plus years now, and I would say when I started, it was more of a place for white males. But I think over time, I have seen a dramatic change in the people who I work with, and in the sort of attitudes that people have toward diversity, and all of those things. And I think it's very true that in some circles, I think on Wall Street and elsewhere, it is a bit of a boys' club, but I don't think journalism is a boys' club, and maybe it used to be, but I don't think it is anymore. I think at Law 360, our top editors are all women. Some of our best reporters are women. Our CEO is a gay man who's married here in New York, and he grew this business himself. So I think there are a lot of different diverse stories at our company, and I certainly don't think that your sex or your ethnicity would hurt you in a journalism career at at this day and age. I really don't think it would.
Aaron, it's grown into maybe a two-track comment there. It can not just be women, but diversity in the workplace. What comes to mind when that question is thrown out there? What have you experienced? And you can go beyond. You can go to earlier jobs before Crain's if you wish, but just a quick answer.
So Crain's newsroom is about 50-50, men and women. We like people who are smart, hungry. If you're from the boroughs, all the better. It makes it easier for us to, you know more about the city coming in than somebody from the outside. Makes it easier to do your job. The best newspaper business journalist in the business is a woman, Gretchen Morgensen at the New York Times. So I think there are opportunities for anybody who's in this business who's willing to put the labor into it. Diversity, yes, newsrooms are more diverse. We need to get more so. You bet. You do not see too many people of Asian or African American backgrounds running newsrooms. Not yet. Maybe in a few years, but we haven't gotten there yet.
Thank you. I'm glad we tackled that again for the most obvious reason that York not only is a place that has a very diverse student body, but also so many women. So I just wanted to throw that in there. And I think I got a little help on that question from Professor Lewis, who helped me with that question. He suggested that one. Now, digital journalism or the web. I was told a couple of years ago at imagine this, in the heat of summer in August, a bunch of journalism teachers all meeting together in Chicago. And I was just sitting there like, why am I here? Why am I not on the beach? And the editor in charge of Google News stood up there and said, I'm looking out there at all of you wearing your suit coats and you're a bunch of gray-bearded old white guys. If you tell your students that the web is a threat or it's a disruptor, you're doing them a disservice. It's a huge opportunity. Now, you've heard in classes that if ad revenue goes down, traditional like full-page ads in the New York Times, that hurts the paper's ability to hire or spend more on coverage. They might get rid of reporters. But I want you to engage us in that debate for a minute where you've seen at your workplaces threat or amazing opportunity. The idea of the web maybe, there is no such thing as Law 360 on a newsstand. It's only available on the web. You do need to sell some copies of Forbes, even though they're relying on that less, correct?
Yes.
And then, of course, Crain's needs to sell some copies, but they'd be crazy to be relying on that for the future. So tackle that. Opportunity, a little bit of a threat. You do see your bosses get pale sometimes because web ads, please embellish on this, please follow up, web ads don't pay the same way. No one's even sure if they work the same way. So tackle that one. Aaron, you first. The whole idea of, and I'll be more specific, mobile. Right now it seems to be, everything has to be ready to read on your phone.
Yep. So here's the economics. A newspaper ad that you could charge $1 for, you can charge a dime for online. Sometimes it's 15 cents. But in other words, your revenues drop 85% when your source of revenue is digital ads. So are you surprised to hear that newspapers are eager to keep people reading the paper as long as they can, including us? It is dawning on us that we have more time with this paper than we thought we did, that the readership is going away slower than people have been warning us. Nonetheless, one day it will be gone, probably. On the other hand, we can get a much bigger audience online, and we have to figure out ways to replace that lost advertising revenue. And we do that by holding conferences. We do that by having paywalls. We give you like a certain number of articles for free, and then you got to start paying for them. No one knows what works. No one knows what the answer is, and we're all sort of struggling along here. So, I have nothing. Is it a threat? Absolutely, it's a threat. Newspapers used to be monopolies. I mean, if you think about it, you were a small town paper, you had all the weekly shopping ads, you had the movie ads, the car dealer, all that stuff is gone. So, and classified ads inch per inch used to be extremely profitable. They're all gone. So what do? The advertising departments all over the country are trying to figure this one out. So we used to make a lot of money at Crain's. Now we make a modest amount of money. At least we're not losing it.
And if we switch over to Pete, you're web only. So we had a different answer. There never was a copy of 360 out of the newsstand you could pick up and read on the subway.
Actually, it's an interesting point because my company, I think it started in 2004. I lose a decade every now and then, so sorry. But
One day you will too.
I can't remember where that happened.
yeah, it started in 2004, long after the concept of the paywall was in full effect on the internet. And at my company, we don't give away articles. You want to read us, you have to pay to get inside the paywall. And it's been a great model. The company has grown, it's done well, and so in a way, it's sad that online journalism is starting to duck behind the paywall as we go forward, because there are less places to read if you're not willing to pay for it. But by the same token, it does keep journalism efforts going forward. So I don't know if that's the answer.
That is good, and
but-
if you pause for a minute, I have
Sure.
a follow-up question. So you're talking about being web only, and I did my serious research here and found out that Law 360 is owned by LexisNexis.
Right.
Okay, so my question, and I negotiated this with Pete before we got started, was do sometimes the higher ups that are managing LexisNexis are they a little worried that people are just Googling stuff now instead of doing a highly detailed Nexus search so you can find every single news story in a really carefully maintained database? Now, because LexisNexis owns 360. So how about that question? What's it like? Do you sometimes overhear writing your news stories? It's not going to cross your mind that much, but do you see that sometimes in memos or annual reports? How is that part of the business going?
I can't really speak for my company. I don't think you can Google any Law 360 story and read the full text unless someone out there paid for a reprint, which is another way that we make money. People will buy a copy of the story if they want to post it or if they want it to be on the internet.
People still have to pay you then, okay?
Yeah. I'm trying to think.
Which is true for all paywalls, right? Exactly.
Right. I guess. Well, if you go to Forbes articles,
free.
yeah,
There's
it's
no
free,
paywall.
but you go through an interstitial ad a lot, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
before you read the story, you have to look at an ad, which I think is a pretty good model for a company that had been free and is trying to transition to revenue online.
So you don't hear grumbling about Google News, Google, and how
I don't-
that's a problem when it comes to LexisNexis, because I know
I try to
every
keep
single
my,
one of you is guilty of using that instead of going and getting the librarians to help you and the journalism professors to help you do a Nexus search, right? Just okay, you can admit it. I can see the guilt in your
I
faces.
still do that.
And so,
Well, if you
so
have access to LexisNexis, you should
they do
use it.
through the library.
Yeah.
Absolutely,
It's
online.
It's a
valuable.
great
It's very
resource,
valuable.
You don't need
especially
to
while
go to
you're in
the library,
academia.
You log in. When you go through the York website, it's possible right through the library button on the York website.
Absolutely. I made full use of that when I was at Maryland getting my master's in journalism. So, and I rued the day I lost my password, whenever that was. It was a long time ago.
So Marinissa, I think we went Aaron, Pete. So let's
So I'm
talk
going to
about
try to
digital.
answer this from the reporter's point of view. I think it's nothing but advantageous for us because at Forbes we have the opportunity to build a brand. So you're not really just a Forbes reporter. You are a luxury reporter for all of New York City or all of the entire world. So I think you're allowed to publish at any point in time. We have a WordPress web interface. And so I can just type up something right after I'm done with this and just, press publish and it'll be viral in whatever, 20, 30 minutes. So I think for that, in that regard, the web has been great because you are allowed to build your own brand. You're allowed to market yourself as much as possible. You're allowed to write whenever you want on the go. So it's been nothing but advantageous for us.
Aaron, can we start over with you and say, let's talk about a daily routine. You have a lot of news stories, as you may or may not know, guys, are very carefully planned. You already know next week blank's going to happen, and then when November hits, you better be ready for this event coming up. But tell us a little bit about your routine. when it comes to lots of interviewing, or oh, I know that day is going to be all writing and getting my notes together, or meetings? Do you have to go out and meet sources? What percentage is on the phone? What's a day? What's your routine like to get the stories out?
Sure. So, because we are a 24/7 multimedia website, in addition to being a paper, we still have this newspaper DNA to us. So, for example, Thursdays we are writing. Thursdays and Fridays, but mostly Thursdays, we are writing the feature stories that will be in the paper Monday. And so I structure my week knowing that that's going to happen.
Pardon me. Tell them a quick story about Crain's being such a major weekly.
Crain's-
I should have included that. in the
Oh,
question.
Crain's is a weekly that comes out Monday mornings at finer newsstands everywhere, and so we also do the web bit too. So we're sort of a hybrid now of a daily publication and a weekly. I generally try to do interviews either on the phone or in person earlier in the week, because I know later in the week I'm going to be busy. I write a column on Fridays. I will write a feature or news on Thursday with in the hopes that it will hold till Monday, and I'm writing anything more immediate during, before, or after that. I spend more time reading than I do on the phone. I mean, I do get pitches all the time from people who want to come and see me and talk about some great product they have. I turn down almost all of them. I spend most of my time sort of trying to get ahead of the New York Times. If you were to say, what's my job? That's it. Try to have a story before they do. And sometimes I succeed and sometimes I don't. So I would say I'm spending Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays reporting, interviewing, thinking, writing for the website when warranted, when news happens. I did one yesterday, did another one before I got here. And then Thursday, I try to leave that open to to just dedicate to this 1,000-word story that I'm going to write for Monday. And then Friday is I write this column that's on in the paper and online, and it comes out every week too. So that's my week.
When you said Friday column,
Mm-hmm.
the old movie scenario is the columnist who you theoretically have the best job in the world because you can write about almost anything, whatever your specialty is.
Mm-hmm.
How often are you banging your head on your desk thinking, okay, I have a list, I'm a veteran journalist, I have topics ready to go, but you're still just beating your head like what?
Oh, I have this
you know,
I have this fantasy that one day I'm going to have like 4 or 5 things that I'm going to write about, that I want to write about, and I would just pull them out of my pocket. It never works that way.
Sometimes you do have a little agita getting the column.
Oh,
done.
all the time. I mean, you're always worried about what it is you're going to write about next, and I have this dream that one day my phone will just ring off the hook with people calling to tell you what a great tip I've got for you, and it just doesn't work. It just doesn't happen.
Thank you. Okay, so Marinissa, what's your routine like?
Routine. We don't really have a routine. My daily routine is just to get up, get like the cheat sheet from Daily Beast, read the New York Times, Wall Street Journal.
Wait a second. Are you going to recommend that for them?
Yes,
I don't
certainly
read the
do
cheat
recommend
sheet in
that.
the Daily Beast. Please explain.
Yeah, so it's just a rundown of major international and domestic news, basically the 10 things you need to know for today, which is phenomenal because I don't do a lot of international news, and neither do I read a lot of international news. So shortly after that, it depends on if I'm working on a larger project. So right now I'm working on the most powerful people list in the world. So my job is to come up with 72 people to nominate. So we're in the nomination stages. So it was a lot of research, a lot of investigation, no interviewing at in the preliminary stages. If I'm not working in one of these bigger projects, it's all dependent on me whenever I want to publish a story. So on the side, I've been working on a story about the Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, who came to America about a week ago. So I've been working on a story for him, and that consists of a lot of interviewing overseas. So I find myself coming home, taking a nap for a few hours, and then going, staying up all night to do interviews in India. So it largely depends on what I'm covering. I do a lot of phone interviews. I don't do any face-to-face interviews unless we have the bigger Forbes conferences. And that's where you meet a lot of these powerful people. Like the last interview that I did was with Cherie Blair and former Prime Minister's wife in England. So it largely depends on what's going on and what the news cycle is and when the next Forbes will be released.
Anybody? Did the radar get triggered at all about the Indian Prime Minister? Huge sensation in New York.
He sold
The
out the
guy,
garden.
the guy does not have the name recognition because all your faces are like, what? But he filled Madison Square Garden with this huge event with members of the U.S. Congress up on the stage with him. It was this. You must have read about it. You didn't go, did you?
No, I actually was slated to go, but I had something to attend the night before, and I couldn't make it. But it was just ruckus. I could not believe that he drew that big of an audience. But he is a major world leader now. He wasn't allowed to come to the United States for the last 9 years, so surprise.
Thank you for that look at your routine. Do Malcolm Forbes still, like?
So Steve Forbes is the chairman and editor-in-chief,
Malcolm's
but
not like dead, is he?
Yeah.
he's dead.
He's dead.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
he's been
yeah.
dead for a long time.
Yeah.
Steve is who I meant to say.
Steve,
I'm sorry,
yes.
I'm out of it.
So,
does he
Steve-
drift around and say, "Hey, Marinissa, how you doing?" Or
So Steve normally he writes a column for the Forbes magazine, but he does not take part in the editorial meetings of any sort. So the Tuesday meetings that we have at 10 a.m., he's not a part of that. But he does have some oversight. We don't know at what point he looks at the magazine
Does he
at
know
the
you?
final. But
Does he say good
oh
morning?
yeah, he's nice. He's a sweetheart.
and he is 1, 2, 6 billion. How big is he?
We've never actually valued
Maybe a
the
little
family.
low, below it.
Yeah, I mean they sold Forbes. Forbes no longer belongs to the Forbes family.
Who owns your company?
It's the Chinese investor, Chinese and Singaporean investor. So
My condolences.
it's not that bad.
No, I'm glad
right?
you have an owner. You have a job.
We have an owner, and they
Yeah.
paid a bulky sum.
Exactly.
And that's where you see there's a need for business journalism, and that's why people abroad are willing to pay for it, and they're willing to dish over $450 million, or that's supposedly the price that they paid for it. So
Wow, good. Okay.
Yeah.
So your routine, Pete.
Check the court calendar and see what is going on in court, and look around at possibilities for news. Yesterday, the MTA, the subway, Metro North, et cetera, the Metropolitan, what are they, Transportation
Transit
Authority?
Authority.
Yeah.
They just opened up a huge trial. They are at odds with a company called Lockheed over a $300 million contract under which Lockheed was supposed to install an integrated security system throughout the entire greater New York City metropolitan area that was supposed to add to the city's ability to detect potential terrorist threats.
wait, is this Lockheed Martin?
Correct.
Oh,
And Lockheed, according to the MTA, dropped the ball and didn't do the work. And according to Lockheed, MTA was a bunch of bungling bureaucrats that didn't help them get the job done. And now they're fighting over this now 10-year-old project that still is not complete. And they are suing each other for something like a total of $300 million in damages one way or the other. So it's a big case. It's one of those things where a lot of people don't know what's going on, but when you sit there and you read about what they're fighting over and how it affects every New Yorker on a daily basis, you wonder why more people don't know about it. So
That's
stuff
a
like
great-
that, is what we try
Who
to
cares
do.
about subway or bus security here? Everybody gets around. Nobody wants to drive. The traffic's so terrible. Joanne?
He said that he checks the court docket. What dockets? Which courts?
We have a team, so my job would be on any given day to go to the Eastern District of New York, which is, not physically go there, go to the website on Pacer, and I think there's like a pull down menu and it says court calendar, and then you enter in the next day's date, and it just pukes out everything that's scheduled, and there will be, any number of narcotics traffickers being sentenced. There will be a trial. There will be a sentencing. There will be all kinds of things, and we just go down the list and go, okay, that looks interesting. We're going to go to that. Same thing with the Southern District of New York, which is the federal court in downtown Manhattan. One of the busiest courts in the whole country. Some of the biggest criminal and civil trials in the history of this country were conducted there. And so that's what we do. We do the same thing for the state courts as well. If something is going on that we think it's important, we try to be there. That's the routine. Yeah.
That triggers one question. Do you consider B Law a competitor, or are they a totally different Bloomberg Law, or better, maybe a better? Because I worked at Bloomberg so long, I'm recovering from that experience. It was amazing, but I'm a recovering Bloomberg cult member. Or are there other competitors that should have named first? Who are you competing with most, or is it an AP court reporter?
We compete with Bloomberg. We also compete with. Bloomberg would be B&A and Bloomberg, and then we compete with Reuters, which has their own legal product. Reuters launched their legal product partially in response to Law 360, and for a while we called it the Law 360 killer, but they didn't kill us; they only made us stronger. So we do compete with several other big companies, and then we also compete with more mainstream media like AP, while a lot of people think the Daily News is mostly scandalous, sensational stuff, and largely it is, but they are in the court. They do a lot of serious journalism. They do a lot of good work, and I think even the New York Post from time to time will write a story that's worthwhile.
I think they're phenomenal. I think the art of writing such a terse little piece, that is an art in and of itself, and I couldn't to this day be that succinct, so I applaud them for all their work.
So I think a lot of competitors.
Is it strictly competition, or sometimes will you walk over to the AP guy and say, did you see that halfway through the court document, clearly there's a gap? Do you ever cooperate a little bit, or is it strictly you solve it yourself? I'm just remembering like an old dream-like recollection of like reporting on City Hall steps, where did you hear what the mayor just said? Because I think I think he's giving the wrong speech. You do talk to the other reporters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not sort of bound to help them if they can't help themselves, but there is a collegiality. It's important. It matters. People will help you, and one day you'll help them. There's 1,000 examples of that.
Yeah. So
if you have something they don't have, you don't have to tell them. But if
there's a clear line.
But if there's something in the middle that you're both working on, then it's probably important not to be a jerk to your fellow scribes.
Format-wise, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go into like the last phase of where we hear from the guests, and then I want your questions from the audience that be ready. Okay, so anything that triggered a question, you can obviously raise your hand right away, but we're going to go into just pure student ask the guest questions in a moment. So be ready for that, and that's how we'll fill out the last phase of this till about 1:50, because we need to get the classroom ready to go for the 5-hour teaching marathon that Professor Lewis is about to launch on his Tuesday afternoon session. So there's something that I call supply and demand. Most people think I'm going to work in showbiz, I'm going to cover movies and music, or I'm going to be a politics reporter in Washington, D.C. I'm going to Paris and London, I'm going to go to Damascus and report on ISIS, God help you if you're doing that. Those are incredibly competitive, so are your fields, but what I'm trying to say is supply and demand. If you have a law specialty, a business specialty, your future could be, it's not guaranteed, but your future could be a little brighter because it's a specialty that really helps you stand out from some of the other expectations you might have right now of what kind of journalism you might want to do. You see what I'm trying to fight my way towards here? Do you feel that way, that your specialty is an advantage in the journalism field? When it comes to supply and demand, there aren't that many of you.
I think that's a fair question, but I think you might be surprised by the answer. I think at the onset of your professional journalism career, I think there will be a lot of people competing for jobs. I remember when I went out into the working world, what I really needed was a job, and I got an opportunity and I took it and I went from there. Knowledge of the legal world and knowledge of how the system works is an advantage for me, especially if there's news along those lines. I mean, I think I've written so many stories and seen so many things that it's very, very little on the litigation or legal side would surprise me, but is it an advantage? I think going back to what you guys mentioned about just showing up and being there and being ready to do work is probably the greatest asset you can have at an early stage in your career. I mean, honestly, just if you get an opportunity, take it and be there, and that should confer its own advantage as you go forward.
Aaron, do you think your specialty as a guy who can, with your senior reporter and ability to cover almost any aspect of Wall Street, puts you into a specialty category? So when it comes to supply and demand, there aren't that many of you, as opposed to, like I said, the people who just want to go to Washington and cover Capitol Hill, for example. You know, the people you see on the evening news, not to use too ancient of an example. What do you think? Is the supply and demand work for you? Or there aren't that many people with your business specialty?
Yeah, I do things that most other journalists can't do. I learned securities analysis along the way of this job, and that's a very helpful thing to know.
And what is it?
Securities analysis is sort of basically saying, here's a company, here's what their earnings are, here's what their revenues are, here's how much money they're losing. Let's make a plausible scenario for what this company is worth. This is what people in Wall Street do all day, every day. If you can play that game with them, you're at a real advantage. You can understand how companies operate and how investors think about them. That's nothing I ever imagined I would know or even be interested in. It happened to be something that became kind of a necessity in my job, and so I gritted my teeth and did it. Now I can go through regulatory documents, which are not a joy to read, and find the things in there that will give you a good story. Companies change their stories all the time in these regulatory documents. They change accountants. They change the way they recognize revenue. They play all sorts of games. And if you can figure those out, because they're not going to tell you about them, you've got some really good stories in your hands.
Marinus, so do you recognize any of that point I was trying to make? Do you hear that? Do you feel that among the more senior journalists you work with? Or do you think it's going to help you, that your specialty sets you apart?
I think because I'm at the infancy of my career, obviously, that there are a bunch of replacements for me. Any malleable little creature can come along and steal my job.
Infancy? I would at least say 8th grade. High school freshman?
But I honestly think that I've been hearing this a lot, is, business journalism is the way to go. You make a lot more money than other journalists do. And you'll have a better career. But I disagree. I think that any journalism at this point in time, it's very difficult. It's hard to make it. But I think if you are in it for the long run and for the right reasons, you can definitely stay ahead. So I don't think it's just for business journalism.
Well, I can phrase it another way.
Yeah.
At Pete's company, there are you have to pay to read his stories.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a business model. It means people are paying,
Yeah.
and a little bit of ads or zero on 360.
I think zero.
Zero ads. So
Sure.
that means you get your stories,
Yeah.
you move around without
Yeah.
anything saying, without Brad Pitt selling you Chanel No. 5. That just really freaked me out when I saw that about a year and a half ago on the front page of the New York Times. Okay, so that's another part of the question, which is, if you work in these specialties, you've got wealthier readers, you've got readers that might pay a little more, let's
Definitely,
assume there's a
yeah.
paywall, and that may benefit your career and your paycheck and your future, and maybe you're more stable. Do you buy any of that? Any of you guys? Anybody can grab that.
All of it. There are a lot of business news outlets in this city. I mean, a lot of them, many of which you haven't heard of. But the business of business journalism is pretty good. It's certainly better than, sort of celebrity-driven news that you see on Yahoo. There's no money in that. So if if journalism is what you want to do, this is a really good, useful place to start, because you never know where your career will take you. You can start at this and wind up somewhere else completely. And getting your foot in the door is definitely the hardest thing. It's the hardest thing for everybody. And if you're willing to walk through this door, you can have an interesting career.
I also think that, just to add on to that, that there are so many skills that you learn in business journalism that are so transferable to everything else. The one thing that I've taken away in the last 2 years at Forbes is everything revolves around money. Just follow the money. And this is a phrase that I've heard like my freshman year here was follow the money. And that's what it is. And that's so important because everything revolves around, Wall Street and businesses, and like you see HP spinning off. Why are they spinning off? And those are questions that you ask yourself, and at the end of it, there's money attached.
Tom,
HP.
Yeah, Tom,
Let's
just
just wake you
wanted-
guys up, HP. Okay?
Tom, I just wanted to ask one question of panelists going forward. I wanted the students to get a feel for what would be either the most impactful kinds of stories you've gotten to cover, as opposed to the sexiest stories you're going to cover. In journalism, there's sort of two ways of measuring a juicy story. Something that seems very high profile, sexy, provocative, and then there's also looking at the impact the story's going to have on a target group and how much it's going to affect people's lives. From the kind of stories that you've gotten to do in the last couple of years, or maybe in the course of your careers, what have been either the most sexiest stories you've covered, as opposed to what's been the most impactful stories you've covered?
Well, one of the biggest surprises. You thought it was a routine assignment and it really just mushroomed into something else.
Whoever wants to.
Yeah, that one you need some warning because you have to go through your memory banks. But
I remember when I was, go ahead.
I used to kill small companies, is how I put it when I wrote Herd in the Street columns at the Journal. I mean,
Give us an
anybody.
example of one of them.
Oh gosh, this was sort of the era of Enron. You remember that? Enron was a giant accounting fraud. Enron was thought to be the greatest company in the country. It was on the cover of Fortune magazine all the time for how smart they were. And what these guys were doing was basically moving money around from one shell to the next. And when that blew up shortly after 9/11, it was a ferocious corporate scandal. And it turns out that Enron had these sort of kissing cousins all over corporate America, people who had worked there, who had sort of taken these tricks they'd learned at Enron as to how to cook the books and do it at other places. And so me and these other reporters were sort of finding out which of these companies were sort of Enron's kin. And that, and so we shut down a lot of bad places that way.
public service, thank you.
Well, it was it put a lot of people out of work. I mean, it was
never mind.
a mixed it was a mixed blessing. And in terms of impact, everything I wrote about the bailout was, it was like writing about the Blitz of London. I think I wasn't at the Blitz of London, but it must have been like that. It was raining hard all the time, and that was truly memorable. I remember telling my editor, "We're going to be writing about this for the rest of our lives." And 6 years later, so far so good. So,
How about a memorable story that either the way Professor Lewis outlined it had surprising impact?
Okay, well, yeah. Why do you get into journalism? I think, if I remember right, when I got into it because I thought I could make a difference somehow, and also going back to the LexisNexis search, I was working the overnight desk at AP and just reading little blurbs from AP Copy. I don't remember whether it was on the AP Wire or on LexisNexis actually, but it doesn't really matter. I found this tiny little blurb about a young woman in Connecticut who went to jail because she, I guess, was at a neighbor's house calling the Psychic Friends Network and ran up this huge bill, and he called the police, and she was arrested for larceny, and it was just this literally 75-word story. And I sat there and read that thing over and over again. I was like, that is amazing. And I started making calls, and by the time a few weeks later, I ran the story. I ran this huge story. I used her name as the anecdotal lead, and ended up talking to the Psychic Friends Network, talking to all these experts, and just ended up sort of writing, I guess you might call, not an expose necessarily, but a long piece about how they prey on these people and what can happen. And it got picked up in newspapers all across the country. It got picked up on the nightly news. This was back in Tom Brokaw's day, I think. And
Don't date yourself.
sorry. And it was just great. It made a difference. It really shined a light on that really sort of hideous sort of underworld that was going on with that stuff. And it still goes on, but the point is that, you know, you can see a small little nugget someplace, and there can be a lot behind it that maybe if you have the time and the inclination, you can uncover it.
And that's actually the biggest story that it seems, because a lot of the people who are getting hit for the most amount of money are the people who can least afford it.
Absolutely, it's
Because those are the ones who are desperate enough to get the advice.
right, or just not aware of what it really is. Absolutely, yeah. I was thinking to myself, this is a little bit off track, but I was thinking to myself in the last few days, if I were a young journalist and I had an opportunity to do something, I would look at what they call internet trolling, and that is a completely unexplored and huge issue in this country.
Go into that.
Well, I was just going to say, people going online and saying horrible things about other people behind this allegedly anonymous mask that they use online. They do it to, you know, people whose families are, you know, when children are kidnapped and murdered, the parents get trolled. I mean, it's a horrible thing for a person to go through, and I just don't think journalists are looking at this, and I believe strongly that it's a huge opportunity in journalism. If that is, you know, you mentioned before you have to have the ability to take risk and the ability to maybe do work by yourself. But I mean, there are areas out there that a young journalist could really explore and spend a career exploring, I think. So.
Would any editors?
One of the points I wanted to make is that for a lot of these stories, I'm trying to talk about access for our students and what they can do and what they can't do. So some of these stories that seem large in scope, one of the advantages of this is it affects individual lives, and it's very easy to localize these stories or to fragment them, to look at individual sort of anecdotal situations with, you know, different victims in different situations, and you can, again, go more in depth with one situation rather than covering the whole problem.
Yeah.
You know, and I think there's not enough of that either.
You know, the best stories come from your everyday life. I mean, last April, I saw an Irish bar across the street from my office closed down. This real crappy old place where all the electricians used to go get drunk. And I was like, geez, they've been there forever. They just closed. Well, their rent got jacked, and you know, that's how it happens. Well, it turns out this is happening to divey Irish bars all over the city. These places are disappearing fast, and to a certain part of the population, that's very sad. And in the meantime, there's this sort of upmarket Irish bar that is being created. You're seeing it starting in lower Manhattan. And so you've got this sort of old New York institution, the shot in the beer bar, being replaced by Irish bars that sort of minimize their association with Guinness and Harp and that kind of stuff, and are trying to sell you an upmarket experience. And it was a very fun story. People loved reading it. Everybody likes that kind of piece. And it all started because a bar across the street closed. You know, you don't need the access to the great and good to do a story like that. And I would just say any editor that you talk to is going to want to see commitment on your part that you're interested in this. And that's really easy to show. Just take it upon yourself to do a story, you know, whether like that or something that interests you, and just write it. And just say, look, I did this. And, you know, whether it got published in the New York Times or something, or just on your website, you know, just demonstrate that you care.
we could turn it over to students. If you have any questions, we also have visiting faculty from other CUNYs here. But I also want to, again, recognize that Professor Sarant organized this, corralled you guys, talked to CUNY Graduate School of Journalism, Greg David, who I think all of you know, or two.
He was my boss.
Yes. Professor Sarant, do you want to throw a question at our panelists, or fire up the students? You
I think
can.
I'm brain dead now.
Too much coffee? Okay.
Too much coffee.
Then let's see what the students want to ask, and maybe I can put a little fuel in the fire and say, are you thinking internships? Obviously, you get your foot in the door, or are you thinking? Or do you want to ask? Do you want to follow up on what our guest said earlier? Go ahead and go for it. Extra credit if you raise your. Okay. 5 points.
Great man in front there.
Introduce yourself, please.
My name is Graciano Claus. I'm the staff reporter at Pandora's Box. I just wanted to ask one quick question. You guys, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys currently doing CSL from this aspect of journalism thing. But why do you think it's hard to gravitate people more to business law? Because you assume that, this is ethical news and this newsworthy, that it'd be important
Yep.
for the audience to know, really important stuff like this.
Yes, all that's true. It's not the sexiest, isn't it more fun to sort of chase Angelina Jolie around and, try to take her picture? I mean, I don't, so that's sort of what I had in mind. I think this job's a lot more interesting than that one, but.
I think there is a lot of that. I mean, I think people want to, write about what they want to write about. If I suppose if someone came to me and said you could go be a restaurant critic for the New York Times tomorrow, I'd probably do that. But I just think the opportunities are fewer and far between there, but it's no less important and it's no less interesting in the world of legal journalism for me personally, because I think, like I was saying before, there really are direct connections between this sort of strange stuff you see in court and in the SEC filings and in the company balance sheets and all that stuff. There really are direct connections to the world. So. Whether or not people are reading it, I think a lot of people do. A lot of investors read it, for sure. Anybody with a stake in a company reads about their company. If you work for IBM, I guarantee you, no matter who you are, you take at least a passing interest in their in what the news media thinks of their quarterly reports and stuff like that. So it's not just completely separate. So. So I think it does matter, and it does apply. So
I think not too long ago when I was sitting in your seat, I was not afraid, but I was hesitant towards being a specialist in something. And I'm nowhere near being a specialist in business journalism, but I was more comfortable in being a generalist, having just being the jack of all trades, knowing a little bit about everything. But once you get into journalism and you realize the scope of something, because it's like a deep, dark abyss. Like there's just so much to learn. And once you realize that and you're cognizant of that, you want to make the most of that opportunity. And so that's why I shifted towards business journalism. And I was more interested in following the numbers than just hearsay. So I think you just have to have a proclivity to be just really interested and intrigued by these things. But it's easy. The business jargon, I think, it's something that takes time to get over. But once you learn the essentials, you're good to go.
What about courses that you wish you could have taken in terms of preparing you for your business or legal career? Are there any college courses that you might suggest our students consider? Maybe accounting, principles of accounting 1, something like that?
Yeah, what was Maryland's approach? Because I know they have an increasingly high-profile program. It's named after, now it has a name. I guess it's just a donor. But let's go start with that. And that was graduate school, though. What was your undergrad?
Philosophy, believe it or not. Not a lot of jobs in philosophy.
Philosophy company wasn't hiring.
Okay, so go ahead, there's the question. What did you wish, or what did you find valuable that you didn't realize is a skill you're using every day? You can peer into the soul of the person you're interviewing,
All right, well, you
philosophically speaking.
You guys will laugh, but the best thing I ever did was learn how to type. Honest to God. When I was in 10th grade, my teacher,
Okay, so much for the journalism class. See you later.
Mrs. Blunt, she taught me how to type for real, like ASDF,
Wow.
That was the greatest thing I ever learned, because until then I was like this, and I finally learned, like, you know, how to type. And to this day, I still see people in the world of journalism like hunched over their keyboard with two fingers going like this. So if you're going to write for a living, learn how to write the right way. And also just anything having to do with, I would say, online technology. I don't do this for a living, but if I ever had a chance to really sort of learn how the underworld of the internet works, I mean, there is so much encryption technology out there and everything like that. I mean, I don't know if you guys read about how the Silk Road website got taken down. I believe it was last year. This was basically an online drug bazaar that was completely encrypted and hidden from public view. And I mean, this stuff is a big deal.
think
There's
we bought drugs
a lot
from
of
there.
money in it.
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah, we actually
I mean,
By the way,
for
my
Forbes.
daughter.
Glenn did.
liked Silk Road Cheese.
this stuff is a big deal. There's a lot of money in it, and there are a lot of smart people on the fringes of this world, and if you can empower yourself to figure out how they operate and what they do, then you can write fantastic stories, I would say, and typing too.
So you're almost advocating then not just, I know how to deal with WordPress, I know how to work in social media. You're saying if you have a chance, learn a little bit of real computer code. Are you saying that?
I don't know if code is the right word, but maybe.
Or something
I mean,
beyond WordPress and
it-
Storify?
I mean, it largely
Twitter.
depends on what you want to do, but yeah. You know,
Go a little deeper than social media. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Go
I
ahead.
would suggest you all read the classics of business journalism. There are a handful of books that are just marvelous, and I wished I had read them before I started. I started reading them when I got to American Banker. Den of Thieves, for example, Barbarians at the Gate, The Informant. There's about 10 or 12 of these books, and it shows you how great this can be and how broad you can sort of spread your wings here. And
Could you repeat those? I mean,
oh, sure. Den of Thieves by James Stewart. Barbarians at the Gate by Brian Burroughs.
You have a Michael Lewis type
Oh
on
yeah,
that?
any of the Michael Lewis books. Liar's Poker is a fabulous read. It's about Wall Street in the 80s, but it's totally applicable to now.
And he also did Blindside, right?
He did Blindside, he did The Big Short, he just did that one about high-speed trading.
What is it
Flash,
called?
Flash Boys.
Okay.
Flash Boys. Anything by Michael Lewis is worth reading. Anything by James Stewart is worth reading. The Informant is a Kurt Eichenwald book. It later became a lousy movie with,
Was
Matt
that Matt
Damon. Matt
Damon?
Damon. Yeah, awful movie. Good book
no.
though. Good book. And I picked these up. You know, the Strand is a marvelous place for this. This is where everybody sells their old libraries. So you can go down there and get these books for like $5 a pop or something, and just have it in your library. The footnotes to these books are masterpieces in themselves. You'll see how they got these stories and how they, what documents they look through to get these pieces, to get these books, and it's just well worth reading to see how good it can be done, how good it can be. Anyway.
Marinissa, how about it? You just got out of Columbia J School. You can sift that through the training you got here and what you learned on the job. What did you miss, or what did you find surprisingly valuable in your academic preparation for life?
I wish I had taken business journalism at Columbia. I definitely didn't think, even at Columbia, which was like 2 years ago, I didn't think I, would have
You
been.
went the opposite direction.
Yeah, and I did not imagine myself working for a business magazine, but I would take a business journalism course. Again, it's things that you can learn while you're on the job, so there's no necessity for it, but I would have perhaps minored in finance or economics, but that's just to get a little bit ahead. But you know, right now I'm currently looking at the CFA just to learn myself. And so you really need to have like either be in a classroom or learn on the job. So that's two options, and then or learn it yourself. So I'm preparing for the CFA just because I have time on my hands and I want to learn more by myself.
And you know that I'm sure your colleagues are like, you do know that's going to be painful.
Yeah, I know. They've all been telling me how dry it is.
Financial planners study and like just until they're bleeding like sweat off their brow to get that. It's a very widely recognized financial certification.
Yep, it's 3 years, thousands of dollars.
Blood, sweat, and tears. Yes.
And 6 months for each exam. That's how much they expect you to study. So.
Wow. I have not going to ask another question. Next, please. Next question. Good. I knew Ashley would not be shy. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Ashley Oliver. Do you guys think that the business journalism world is shifting towards a more internet-based, like all of the magazines? Are they shifting more in this new technological age?
All of them are shifting that way. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we still sell however many papers we sell, 25,000 or something like that. But you know, everything that's new being created is online.
Actually, let me ask a quick question about that. You know, with online journalism comes the need to more frequently update stories, keep the stories fresher.
Yeah.
Talk about how that constant need for updating of stories is changing the way you're reporting and the pressure on reporters.
Stay out of the hamster wheel if you can. That's what we call this, you know, where you update a story every half hour or an hour. Now, some stories have to be done that way. The stock market, it moves every second, so you update the story. But it's very difficult and not the best use of your time to be in a place where that's the priority. To be constantly changing the story because you think you're going to get more web traffic that way. It's not at all clear to me that works, and it certainly is not a good long-term career path. So when you enter a situation, see what they feel about the hamster wheel. Even use that term, because they're going to know what it is. Careful with that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask maybe a follow. It's sort of related to that.
Introduce yourself.
I'm Joel Hushai from Queensborough Community College. I'm curious about your workflow, and I'm amazed to hear that Forbes is using WordPress. But we're building a newspaper website, and it's going to be a revolution from print only to kind of web to print. So I'm curious to know what the process is, and that you can upload and then you go live, or is there a series of acts or vetting? By
I do
editors?
not have an editor. No one overlooks my work before I press publish, so I need to make sure, I need to be very meticulous and be like, holy shit, you know, word by word, or, you know, spelling needs to be on, I mean, I think WordPress does have a spelling, actually, thing. But I know, I sometimes do run stories by my editor, so I wrote a story about Kashmir about a month ago, and I'm from Kashmir, so I was completely disheartened. It was, there was like a deluge of rain, and it completely wiped out the center city. So I came into the office very disheartened, and my editor-in-chief, Randall Lane, comes in, and he asked me, what's up, what's wrong? And I was like, listen, I'm taking a flight out to Kashmir this Sunday. I'm sorry, but I'm gonna miss the next 2 weeks of work, and this is gonna be my vacation. And he says, no, you're not going to make a single difference when you're there. You're a writer, so just write about this. And so I wrote a story in about 4 hours and did interviews in India and got it all done and published it. He didn't take a look at it, although he was like, you know, why don't you go write about it? I thought it was a conflict of interest because I'm from Kashmir. But he gave me the go-ahead, and I did that. And I beat the New York Times by 5 days with that story. So it's you know, this is the power of just being able to publish at any single time.
Is that unusual? Just if I may follow up further, is that typical of news organizations today that you?
Oh, at Forbes, you publish at any time. All the producers, all the writers, they can publish at any time. When you have a bigger story that's going to go into the magazine issue, yeah, you have to wait. We're bi-weekly, so we have to wait. But you can pitch any story, you can talk it over with an editor, but he does not have a final say.
If you beat the Times, then I won't say did they pick up your expenses, how much of your expenses did they pick up? Don't say zero.
So no, nothing. This is what happened. So we actually, when I ran the story, it was like a Tuesday afternoon. I think it was September 15th or something. I knew what was going on. I knew the ground situation because I had been closely following it. I'm from Kashmir. My grandparents were stuck in a house, submerged for 3 days. And so I was a complete, even being in the United States of America, I knew the ground situation. So I had the leg up there. And the New York Times, whereas they needed to send someone from the New Delhi bureau, who was a friend of mine, Nindha Najjar, she published the story, but 5 days too late. She ended up flying in from New Delhi to go to Kashmir, and she didn't have the sources that I had. But I was very well connected, so I was very fortunate at that time. And then the managing editor comes to me 5 days later. He's like, "Oh, so the New York Times, they published your story yesterday." And so that, the joy of being able to publish at any time.
That's an eternity in today's hamster wheel life. 5 days might as well be a month, for God's sake.
Well, sometimes it's not news until the New York Times says it is.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
That's true,
Everybody
that's
knows
true.
that.
But that's not typical of Law 360 or Crain.
No, we have editors look at everything we write before it publishes. They, you're not at liberty to, you can certainly tell them what you're going to write about, and they'll usually say sounds good to me, but they're not going to, you can't push the button and just have it up there.
You must be, but Marinissa, you must be a good sleeper, because that would give you, when anxiety goes up, like, oh, I think there's, and you log back in and look at it again and see
No,
if you have to make
can
an
I
edit.
just say, those days were hell, because anyone, the whole world can, they can get a heads up on you. So I think at that point in time because I had been doing reporting, I did a follow-up piece a week later, and I was like, oh man, my heart was in my hand, because anyone at any point in time can publish the same story. And get access to those. By that time, it was a week and a half, so anyone can get access to those people on the ground.
I'm just thinking that if you don't have those editor gatekeepers, that you might worry that there was a mistake in there. And then you don't log back in and triple check it just for the hell of it, just to see if anything looks like it's your face is telling you don't.
No.
That's a
Well,
good sense
because
of
I
confidence.
know that I have to be very, very diligent throughout
Yeah.
my reporting
Okay.
process, and that I know I have to make sure names are spelled right for sources and all of that. So
You're
I make
confident.
sure I do that before.
That's a little scary. but
And
you're
that's
confident.
all
That's good.
reporters. So we only have 50 reporters in the entirety of Forbes, and so all of us make sure that we go through the same process.
Next. Introduce yourselves. Tell us all about yourself. Go ahead.
My name is Natalie. I'm also from Queensboro. And I just have a question about internships, or I guess credentials in general. How valuable are they really? Because nowadays it kind of seems like, people kind of look at journalists as everyone just kind of running for the same job, and, they all kind of look the same. So how do you stand out in terms of internships?
Which one of you sometimes works with an intern? Zero.
I do.
A little
I
bit.
do,
Okay, so
sort of.
so I like the ending. How do you stand out? How do you make it valuable?
Okay, so I've been an intern myself, and I haven't been a very good intern after seeing the interns that I see at Forbes. I think that internships are very valuable, only because they help you get to where you want to go, and because they help you decide what you don't want to do and what you do want to do. So I was at ABC, and I realized this may not be my sort of business. I may not want to go into broadcast media. I may be better. I might be too camera shy, or I don't want to transcribe 4 hours worth of interviews. So there are things that you realize that you don't want to do and what you're good at and bad at. And so you realize your weaknesses and your strengths while you're doing internships, and I think that's absolutely crucial. And in terms of looking at interns now, I think it amazes me at how much work interns put in at Forbes. I think they work more than me sometimes. I leave the office at 7 and they're there until 8:30 or 9:30. We had a closing for the Forbes 400 last week, and So the Forbes 400 is we cover 400 billionaires who make the most amount of money.
And they finish the actual issue, so they are sweating the last minute of the magazine.
And so we're there, like last year, I was there until 3 a.m. fact checking and making sure that everything was edited properly. And so I was there until 3 a.m. and the interns are there with you. You know, they're doing work too. They're fact checkers on these stories. And this year we managed to get everything done at, midnight. And the interns were there all along. So they put in as much work as we do, and it's like having full-time employees. And they churn out stories as quickly as we do. So they're treated no less.
Quick, another question. Yes,
Sorry.
make it sure.
I'm Ashley again. Is it more in person? Are there more in person interviews or on the phone interviews with business journalism?
On the phone.
Aaron,
More on the phone than in person. Yeah.
Pete, you're working the phones a lot, or you go out to news conferences
A
sometimes?
lot of phone, a lot of emails.
Emails.
Lawyers love email. They'll come back to you faster on email than anything else.
Lawyers love
So-
email. That's a tease.
And it's perfect for them too, only because
Yeah.
they have a track record of what they
Papers
said.
out, right.
So.
Or-
Good question, because we're preaching in-person interviews, which produces more color and material, but when you have to get your story done that day, that hour. Good. Yes.
My name is Cassia West, and I was just curious, as reporters, do you guys feel at all threatened by citizen journalism? Like, do you think it affects the way you report news or how fast you go about it, or
Good question.
anything at all?
I wouldn't say threatened, but I think when you're at a news organization, you are you end up enjoying some tools that a citizen journalist may or may not have access to, whether it be research tools, or something as simple as having a business card that says Forbes on it, as opposed to having something from Kinko's that says this is my business card. So there are reasons why being part of an organization, and I don't want to sound like I'm talking down to citizen journalism, because I'm certainly not. I think it's a great thing, but I don't think it's a threat per se, especially in our business and legal world, where getting the trust of your readers is an important part of the relationship, and just developing that relationship with your audience over time is part of what drives the whole relationship between, I think, business and legal reporters and readers. So
I think as an addendum just to that, I do think that in terms of access, you guys have as much access as we do. Like, just because I'm from Forbes, and that definitely, I have a wider audience, and I have a name brand that's obviously backing up my reporting, but I do think that you should never come to your editor or your teacher or your professor and say, listen, I couldn't get access. Like, that's the most bullshit excuse that I've ever heard, pardon my language. Like, I honestly think that it is you. Sorry.
I can't yell that in my class. People are like, you tell the dean.
No, Meredith, I hear you.
Yeah, look at his face, it's bright red.
He's so proud.
I'll tell you guys something that I found that works very well over the years. When somebody doesn't want to talk to you, they say, "Oh, I'm sorry, we're not going to talk to you," and I'll say, "That's fine. It's more room for me."
Yeah.
And that works more often than you think.
Yeah.
Or tell them about their competitor who already spoke to you, and therefore they're leaving a larger void for.
Well, yeah, that can be a factor too. But I like to sort of, boy, you sure you trust me to,
Try to extend this, right?
Yeah, so maybe
good.
you do want to talk.
We have about, oh, go
I
ahead.
was just say, I've always been amazed. Everyone wants to talk to journalists.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter who they are. They could be, a sultan of some, Middle Eastern protectorate, or they could be, the most highest paid lawyer or CEO. They want to talk to people. They always do, especially if it's something they care about, and if they trust you as a journalist, and or even if they don't, they'll still. It's a very important part of of sort of the social contract.
But additionally, you can't just walk into an interview and be like, hey, what's up? You know, like, that's not how it works.
No.
You have to go in there knowing as much as anyone else on the topic and, you know, like, make sure that you're one step ahead and know what you're talking about. You know, don't go in clueless. And I think that's what gives you some gravitas. So definitely.
Know enough to show that you've paid attention to who this
Yeah.
person is.
Yeah.
That's, you know, you can't know everything, but you can know enough to sort of say, you know, we can have some kind of
Hi,
conversation.
I have a question.
Introduce yourself, please.
Oh, sorry. Hi, I'm Star. So, Marinissa, you were talking about the Forbes reporting process. What exactly does that include, and how did you use that when you went to the fashion week?
Oh, okay. So Forbes, well, any reporting. I think because I was well connected with the troops on the ground, I had more insight as to what they were doing. So when my editor gave me he said, go ahead and you can write the story. I started, I looked up some major statistics that were released by the disaster management team in India, and then I think at that point in time, the BBC and The Guardian had not reported on it, so I didn't have any idea of what the casualties were. But I generally was referring to the government websites, and then I spoke with the Red Cross, I spoke with NGOs that were on the ground, I spoke with journalists who were on the ground, so they can give me, they didn't have the tools at that point in time to report on the incident, so they gave me a look into what was happening. So it was just a bunch of interviews with not only just citizens, but NGOs and people that were based in India, like New Delhi and Mumbai, who were well aware of disaster management. So just a really good utilization of every single person and agency that I knew that was on the ground. And once I got all those sources together, at that point in time, there were accusations that the state, that the Indian government was refusing to let international aid in. So I talked to the UN here, the UN headquarters. I spoke to some people from Geneva. And so I got everything and I published the story. And I had received emails prior to even being interested in the story or just even thinking that I was going to write about the story. I had contacted a few agencies to see how aid is dispersed. And so I had that insight, and then I put the entire story together in a matter of a few hours.
Marinissa, thank you.
No.
I'd like to thank all of our guests, Aaron from Crain's, Marinissa from Forbes, and Pete from Law 360.